Morning, all. This is Quantum Strategy and David Roach here with the Monday mini podcast on macro that may matter to markets on Monday and beyond. Here we go. Well, 4 or 5 things I have to talk to you about this morning. First of all, the polls in the United States are looking like the betting odds, increasingly like a Trump victory. If I look down at the swing states, which have been telling us nothing for many weeks, they have changed. And now Trump would get the vote in 4 states and Kamala Harris in 3 states. That would result in 31 presidential votes for her and 63 presidential votes for Trump. This is, of course, very close, but it is quite interesting to note that Harris's majority in most of the swing states that she controls is razor thin. It's less than 1%, so within the margin of error. And Trump has a much lesser risk in at least 2 of the 4 states he controls, or is said to get win the vote in, where his margin is above 2%. So it's looking more like Trump at the moment. Of course, the election is so close, I don't know the outcome, but I do know the results. It is likely that the program of Trump will be highly economically disruptive, and that his tariffs, which he will impose, will cause inflation and lower growth in the US and a pretty immediate reversal of Fed easing policy, which the markets, surprise, surprise, will not like. Whereas Harris's Harris win will be a vote for continuity. I don't like her economic policies, but they are not kind of gobbledygook like Trump's policies based on slogans. They have become more fleshed out, and they are, while not addressing any of the fundamental issues in the US, they are not the sort of policies that would cause major disruption. It would be a continuity vote. And in international politics, of course, Trump's policies to shift all his allies onto a slate marked client states and just do transaction deals with them individually, that would result in the destruction of US power in the Far East, particularly Indo-Pacific theater. And of course, it would do enormous damage to NATO, and it would mean the betrayal of Ukraine. All of these are very economically expensive because it will involve a race for arms in the Far East, and also, of course, in the European theater. So that is a lot more expensive than Harris's economic policies, which would, in foreign policy, mean a greater focus on the US, but it would be a gradual process of the US making its allies pay for more of their defense. In that circumstances, the market would probably go up. So I disagree with the analysis that Trump is good for markets and Kamala Harris is bad for markets. I think it's the other way around after a few days, which they can go either way. The second thing I want to talk to you about is what's happening in the Middle East. Israel has not yet attacked Iran, and I don't know what the timing is, and neither does anyone else. But it does seem that Israel is asking the US for greater protection from potential escalation effects of its attack on Iran. It wants more THAAD missiles, which are intended to intercept ballistic missiles, which it obviously fears would be aimed at its cities. The closer we get to the election, the more likely the Israeli attack is to be after the election, but there's no knowing whether it will or not. My own view is that given the US protection that it has been given, Israel must have agreed to limit its attacks on Iran, stopping short of wiping out its oil production capacity and its nukes and their supply chain. If that is the case, then a deep strike against Iran's military potential will probably leave markets quite indifferent. In fact, a sigh of relief. But don't forget that the ultimate war is going to be the war when Israel delivers on what is unavoidable, which is wiping out Iran's nuclear weapons capacity and seeking a regime change by destroying its oil assets. That will happen within 12 months. But whether it happens now or later is something I can't tell. But what I do know is when it does happen, that's the day that the geopolitics becomes economically highly significant through the oil price and the involvement of China and particularly Russia in the defense of Iran. And that's the day the bear market begins. Okay, the third thing I wanted to tell you about was the Moldovan election. Moldova has had a referendum as to whether it wants to join the EU, and it is also at the same time having a presidential election. At the moment, the incumbent president looks set to win in a second round runoff with her major opponent. But the vote for the EU policy for Moldova to continue on the road to EU membership was only voted by the narrowest and unconfirmed decimal place victory, which is a direct result of Russia's intervention in bribing, corruption, and in information wars on the Moldovan democratic system. So Russia very nearly, but not quite, attained its objectives. What it reminds us of, or should, is the enormous power of the disinformation war, the gray zone warfare which takes place between great powers and will get worse. So normally one might think this might make a small difference at the margin, but in the case of Moldova, it very nearly put the country on a course back towards embracing Russia. That goes to show how incredibly dangerous Putin and the Russians are. The final thing we have to talk about is China. So we've had all the stimulus I think we're going to get for the moment. I am pretty pessimistic that this sort of stimulus will actually reverse the course of the Chinese economy, but it may prevent some collapse. The stimulus falls principally into injections into local governments who are in a powerless financial state and banks so that they can help to buy up or provide the finance for others to buy up the property overhang. There's very little stimulus on the side of the consumer. And I think the consumer is the sector which really has to provide growth in China, because world trade is no longer going to tolerate China exporting its surpluses. And at the same time, the consumer is about 20 percentage points less of GDP in China than its emerging market peers, and even more if you compare it to the developed economies. But being led by a single-party state with Leninist Marxist origins means that the Chinese leadership really only believes that supply-side economics in terms of putting money into production and producing excess production over China's own needs is something that the real economy should focus on. They do not really believe in the consumer, who can be fickle and use such spending to become more individualistic and less devoted to the party. As a result, I think China is on a trajectory towards a growth rate of 3 to 4%, maybe a little higher this year, but it is certainly not a country which, in my view, is taking the correct measures in terms of putting the politics to right, creating a private sector that is protected by constitutional rights and law, which are all necessary elements to re-establishing the sort of growth rates we once saw in China. It's not going to happen. And in my book, China remains uninvestable. So I think we have to be very cautious at this stage of markets because there's nothing cheap. There are few cushions provided in terms of valuation around the world, which is why gold is going through the roof. And I think that when we go forward, we are likely to see conflicts arising in multi-theaters, including, of course, the one we've got, which is in Ukraine, but it's going to spread principally to the Middle East, and with potential hostile movements by China towards Taiwan as the stimulus programs are cyclical, not secular, and are not going to deal with the secular problems. So that economy is going to provide an excuse, perhaps, for the leadership to get more militant and conjure up more nationalistic fervor to hide its own shortcomings. So what that actually means is that in the next 12 months, geopolitics will cross the line of cost and relevancy to economics, and that in turn will cause a much higher rate of volatility in most financial markets around the world. Thanks for watching.